The doorway stood 11 meters high, towering over everyone who approached it like the entrance to an ancient temple. It wasn't built that way, because the Vithrani were giants. They weren't. At full height, they rarely exceeded 2 meters, their slender frames as graceful as winter branches. 4 pale eyes ran in a vertical line down their ash-colored faces, giving them an unsettling calm that few outsiders ever forgot. The colossal doorway existed for a different reason. To the Vithrani, architecture was philosophy carved into stone. The size of an entrance declared the importance of what lay beyond it, and every visitor was meant to feel humbled before crossing the threshold. By that measure, there was no building more significant in known space than the Galactic Immigration Bureau. Every traveler, diplomat, refugee, merchant, and explorer seeking entry into civilized space passed through these doors. To the Vithrani, it was not merely an office. It was the gateway to the galaxy itself, the most important building in the known universe. Ambassador Lena Vasquez stood at the base of those doors and stared up at them. She had been standing there for 40 minutes. The doors had not moved, the guards flanking them. 2 Vithrani soldiers in pale ceremonial armor had not moved either. They hadn't even blinked. She wasn't sure they could blink. She hadn't been able to confirm that yet. 40 minutes standing on the crystalline plaza of VTH Prime, under a sky that was the wrong shade of blue, too green at the edges, like a bruise healing in the wrong direction, holding a briefcase that contains 6 years of work, 12,000 pages of documentation, and the formal application of the human species for membership in the Galactic Union. Behind her, the rest of the delegation waited in careful silence. Dr. Oren Caffey, humanity's lead xenodiplomacy specialist, stood with his hands folded behind his back, watching the back of Lena's head the way a man watches a grenade he's already thrown. Beside him, Colonel Yara Solis, technically present as a security liaison, practically present because someone in the UN had decided that soldiers made governments feel better, stood at parade rest, her expression arranged into something that communicated professional patience, and not at all the deep, simmering impatience underneath it. The 4th member of the delegation, a young translator named Pell, was trying very hard not to look at the guards. He was failing. They unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. There was something wrong with how still they stood. Humans fidgeted. Humans shifted their weight, and scratched their noses, and blinked too much when they were nervous. These guards stood like objects, like furniture that had been built to look like soldiers. Lena pressed the communication panel on the door for the 7th time. The chime rang, hollow, musical, completely ignored. "They know we're here," Oren said quietly, stepping up beside her. "They've known we were here for 40 minutes, Lena replied. "It could be a test. Everything is a test with them." She pressed the panel an 8th time. "The question is, whether standing here and pressing this button is passing or failing." Colonel Solis spoke without moving her eyes from the guards. "In my experience, waiting outside a door for 40 minutes, while armed personnel ignore you, is rarely a sign that things are going well." The shuttle ride back to the orbital station was quiet, not the comfortable quiet of people who had nothing to say, but the tense quiet of people who had too much to say, and were waiting for the right moment to say it. Lena sat near the viewport and watched VThet Prime shrink below them. A pale, delicate world of white stone and silver water, and cities that looked from orbit like scattered jewelry. It was a beautiful planet, and she had spent months learning about it, its history, its culture, its art, its centuries-long tradition of cautious, measured diplomacy. The Vithrani had been members of the Galactic Union for 400 years, respected and influential, and the Bureau of External Relations had been their idea. They had built the system that had just rejected humanity's application. They believed in it. That was the part that was hardest to be angry about. When Oren finally broke the silence, naming the 17 grounds aloud, Lena cut him off gently. "She knew," she said, "and she knew about the trade threshold too. What mattered now was what came next. They would go home, report, regroup, and come back. Not through the appeals process, which could take 40 to 80 years, but through something else, something she didn't have a name for yet, but intended to find on Earth. The rejection landed like a stone in quiet water, its ripples spreading in every direction. The isolationists said they'd told everyone so. The pragmatists called the timeline unfortunate, but manageable. A smaller, quieter group, the one Lena found herself drawn toward, argued that the requirements were designed to exclude, that the union hadn't admitted a new member in 60 years, that the self-referential prerequisites weren't oversight, but a deliberate filter. Lena requested a second mission within 3 weeks of returning home. That request was denied. She requested a meeting with Secretary General Nuosu instead, and spent 4 hours making the case that standard diplomacy wasn't going to work, that the union's charter contained emergency provisions, allowing a current member species to sponsor a provisional track that bypassed the standard prerequisites entirely. Nuosu listened without interrupting, then asked the only question that mattered. Which member would do that? Lena told her she was working on it, which was at the time aspirationally true. The thread she'd found led to the Droth, a quiet and methodical people who traded in biological data and pharmaceutical compounds and had no particular strong feelings about human union membership, which meant they might be persuadable. Over 6 weeks, she built a relationship with their cultural attaché, Sis Vin, sending everything. Earth's history, its art, its science, its embarrassing centuries of conflict, and the hard, imperfect structures it had built to end them, and making no attempt to oversell. She simply made the case that humanity deserved the chance to try. SS Vin's replies came slowly, every 5 to 12 days, and Lena answered each one within hours. This went on for 3 months until a Tuesday morning in March brought a message only 2 sentences long. The Dearth Biological Cooperative was prepared to offer provisional sponsorship, subject to one condition. The condition, it turned out, was not what she expected. The condition came attached to a briefing document that Lena read 3 times before she fully processed what she was looking at. A Drath deep space survey vessel, operating near the outer boundary of Union-charted space, had detected an anomaly in a region that was supposed to be empty. A pattern in the background radiation with the kind of structure that meant intention. After 6 weeks of careful listening, they understood what it was. A weapon not fired, and not ancient, but actively being assembled in the dark between stars by a species the Union's records listed as believed extinct. The Caft had been founding members of the Union 700 years ago, then expelled, the historical records selectively redacted, leaving only the outcome, after which they had vanished from known space entirely. The survey vessel's discovery suggested they had not gone as far as everyone assumed. The trajectory analysis run 16 times, because the first 15 answers were too terrible to immediately believe, pointed the weapon at one specific target. Vth Prime the Durath were afraid, in a way that lived below the level of words, and what they needed from humanity, in exchange for sponsorship, was speed. The Union's consensus requirement for military deployment could take 2 years. They needed someone who could move faster than that. Lena called Secretary General Nuosu within the hour. The Durath estimated 14 months before the weapon reached operational capacity. 3 had already passed, leaving 11. Nuosu asked whether the Vithrani had been told, and Lena explained that the Durath didn't believe they would act in time through official channels. The question became what humanity could do, and what doing it would cost. Lena negotiated a written guarantee from SS Vin's sponsorship regardless of outcome, so long as humanity made a genuine attempt, and had it in hand within 48 hours. The ship they sent was the Uns Meridian, chosen not for size or firepower, but for 3 specific qualities. It was fast, it was quiet, and its captain, Commander Dara Owe, had a record of doing the right thing in situations where the right thing was genuinely unclear. Lena went with it over Nasu's firm suggestion that she stay on Earth, on the grounds that having diplomatic authority present would be considerably more efficient than routing critical decisions through a 4-day communication lag. Nosu had looked at her for a long moment and said, "Don't get killed." Lena had taken that as approval. The transit took 18 days, which Lena spent in briefings with OA and the tactical team, running scenarios and mapping variables until there were no questions left to ask. On the 14th day, OA raised the one that had been sitting beneath everything. Why were the Kavath pointing a weapon specifically at the Vithrani? Lena gave the answer she'd been carrying since she first read the briefing. The Vithrani had built the bureau, the membership system, the requirements that determined who belonged and who didn't. The Caft had been expelled through that very system by their former partners. 700 years of grudge had an architecture, even if it didn't have a justification. On the 18th day, the Meridian dropped out of FTL, and the sensors went quiet. in the way they go quiet when they found something enormous, and cold, and thoroughly non-reflective. The structure extended across nearly 400 kilometers of space, and its power readings were orders of magnitude beyond what the survey vessel had recorded 3 months earlier. It had been building faster than the Durath knew. The tactical officer ran the numbers twice and reported in the careful, steady voice of someone delivering bad news to people who need to stay calm. At current accumulation rate, the weapon would reach firing threshold in approximately 63 days. They couldn't destroy it alone, but its core node, where the primary power conduits converged, was oriented defensively outward toward Union space, leaving a window for something that was already close enough to get inside. 63 days to get the Union to authorize a military response through a process that took between 4 months and 2 years. Oki turned to Lena and asked what their other options were. The message went to Sarv Dolan, not through official channels, not to the Union's military council, but directly to the third secretary, who had stood in the doorway 11 months ago and listed 17 reasons why humanity didn't belong. Lena chose him deliberately. She had read his file carefully enough to know he was not a politician, but a genuine bureaucrat, someone who believed in the system he served and had spent 40 years trying to make it work correctly, and who had argued unsuccessfully that the biological survey requirement was logistically unreasonable, then implemented it anyway because he believed in the system even when it was wrong. He was the kind of person who's shown something real and terrible would do something about it. She wrote him the most honest thing she had ever put in writing, where the meridian was, what it was looking at, what it would do in 63 days, and what humanity could do to stop it if the Vithrani were willing to move within 72 hours. She told him about the Durath intelligence and the Kaf and her theory about the grudge. She told him she understood in the small way she was able to, and something about what a door that wouldn't open felt like. She told him the meridian could reach the core node in 18 hours at maximum speed, and that the plan would work if the Vithrani could provide a distraction, a show of force at the outer perimeter, enough to pull the weapon's defensive attention outward long enough for the meridian to get inside. She told him she was asking him to trust her. The response came in 4 hours and 11 minutes. "We are mobilizing 18 hours. Do not be late." Signed not with his title, but with his name alone. The next 18 hours were the longest of Lena's life. The meridian ran dark and fast. Its engines pushed to the edge of rated capacity, while Owei's team ran the approach simulation 19 times, and found 3 problems, fixed 2, and decided the third would have to be handled in the moment. At the edge of detection range, something was happening at the weapon's outer perimeter. The Vithrani had come. Not just the planetary defense fleet, but the full forward naval force. 17 vessels appearing simultaneously out of FTL in a coordinated emergence pattern. The weapon's defensive architecture had never been designed to face. The power readings shifted, the careful patient accumulation redirecting toward defense. And for a window of approximately 4 minutes, the core node went from heavily defended to merely guarded, Owei said. Now, the Meridian dove in the official accounts. The next 11 minutes were described in clean tactical language: approach vector, ordnance deployment, structural failure cascade, confirmation of core node destruction. The people who had been there described it differently in the months afterward. They described the weapon coming apart not explosively but slowly, like a held breath finally released. 400 kilometers of construction, 700 years in the making, becoming 400 kilometers of debris drifting quietly into the permanent dark. Lena sent a single short message: "It's done." Sarv's reply arrived 40 minutes later, requesting the honor of her presence at her earliest convenience to review some documentation. She read it 3 times, and then she started laughing. The real kind. The kind that comes up from somewhere deep when something has been held tight for a very long time and is finally allowed to let go. The provisional membership ceremony was held not in the Bureau of External Relations, but in the Hall of Founding, a space reserved for moments the Union considered significant enough to require its oldest room, its walls carrying the marks of 4 centuries of decisions and alliances and crises navigated. Sarv read the declaration in Vithrani, then in the Galactic Common Tongue, then in a gesture not required by protocol in English, spoken carefully with strong accent and imperfect rhythm, but with each word placed with the deliberate intention of someone who had practiced. He reminded her that provisional status was not full membership, and that the standard track would still need to be completed. She told him that Durath had offered to help revise the biological survey methodology. He tilted his head in the gesture she had finally decoded, with Sazvine's help, as something close to approval. Then he extended his hand, a human gesture he had looked up and practiced, and decided was the right thing to do, and she shook it. When she asked whether he had thought humanity would come back, he said he had hoped so, though he had not been certain. What had made him hope, she asked. He told her she had pressed the communication panel 8 times before he opened the door. The record before her had been 4. Most applicants pressed it twice. The door had never been locked. He said it never was. It required only persistence to open, and 8 times had suggested to him that her species might have the necessary quantity of that. He turned back to the assembled dignitaries and the cameras transmitting to 8 billion people who had been told this moment would not happen in their lifetimes. Lena looked down at the document in her hands. Outside the sky was the wrong shade of blue. She was beginning to like